First of all, thank you everyone for being here this morning. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here before you. My name is Dipta Shah. I work at a small boutique transaction advisory and management consulting firm called 54i. The reason we exist in Nepal is to help enable the digital economy in this country. The 54i actually stands for 5 ingredients that we think is required for innovation to flourish, right? So access to funding, knowledge networks, access to talent, and access to space where entrepreneurs can think, build amazing product, and solve the toughest questions. That's why we exist in this ecosystem. I'm very much a product of, a believer that people learn from experience. And so in my experience, I'm not gonna risk doing slides online. I'm gonna just talk you through what my experience has been coming back home and really diving into the ecosystem that I've come to know as Nepal. And there are 3 things that I'm going to touch upon today. One, I want to talk a little bit about us needing to take control of our own narrative and bridge what I call the perception divide. So there's a perception of what the Nepal ecosystem looks like on the one hand, and the reality of what I've experienced on the other, and that bridge is wide, and I think we need to work on bridging that divide. The second thing I want to talk about a little bit is how we can help people who want to help us help themselves. And that's an interesting topic in and of itself. I'll spend a little bit of time on that. And I'd like to conclude, finally, by talking about the segment of this ecosystem that I think deserves the most attention, which is the earliest stage, right? So let me start with the first thematic issue that I want to go through. So I moved back to Nepal about almost a year and a half ago, and my friend Raj was actually on the flight, helping me very nicely, very courteously get off the plane. So thank you for that, Raj. I never got to thank you getting off that plane. But anyway, coming back to the topic, you know, 3 years ago, this question came up while I was still gainfully employed by my former employer. The question about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And part of the job at the time, the remit, was to kind of scour the earth, the globe, to look for investable companies in emerging markets doing AI and ML, right? And of course, you know, being where I was from, naturally, the question that surfaced to the top of my mind was, what's happening in AI in Nepal, right? Well, what could possibly happen? That was then. And the answer was, I just could not get in my mind where the topic of AI would evolve into in the Nepali ecosystem. And I came home with that perception that, you know, Nepal, deep tech, probably not a lot is going to happen here over the near term. I was so wrong. How many of you guys know a company called Cloud Factory? There you go, right? So I was wrong because last month, as you'll know, Cloud Factory just did a $65 million round, Series B round, right? That's $65 million that a company that was born, raised, still exists, is growing in Nepal, raised, right? So perception, reality, okay? And I want to tell you about another company that's also doing amazing stuff in the AI space, okay? My friend Samir Maske, after he finished his PhD at Columbia University in machine learning, decided, I mean, he could have gone and worked for anywhere, made $1 gazillion, right? But no, he decided he wanted to do something special. He wanted to apply himself to helping people like him in Nepal. So he came and founded Fuse Machines. How many of you guys know Fuse Machines? All right. So he came and founded Fuse Machines, and they've been growing steadily, healthily. They've been basically pivoting their business model. They've been doing really well. They've been attracting the imagination of investors across the spectrum, from DFIs to impact investors to commercial VCs based in New York and abroad, right? So they're doing something that was unthinkable to me 3 years ago, but they're doing it. What are they doing? They're basically taking individuals from this ecosystem who did not have the sort of access that they can provide. They're training these individuals, making them certified in various specific applications of artificial intelligence, and then they're selling their services to companies abroad who are actually in the business of artificial intelligence, right? So go figure, right? Nepal, artificial intelligence, how did this happen? If you think about the number of people that they're training every year, or that they're poised to train in Nepal every year, we will have at least 5,000 to 10,000 trained AI professionals servicing clients in Western countries before 5 years are out. I guarantee you. And I know this is going to happen. Why? Because I know the people in that company, and I know Samir, and I know they're dedicated to making this happen, right? Again, perception, reality. 5 years ago, I was in Nepal for a visit with my family, and as I often came back home because I love home, and I ended up at a 10th floor office in Hattisar. And I ended up there with a group of 5 guys sitting around a computer, a laptop, and they showed me this table. Okay, I had no idea what was going on in the fintech space then. They showed me this table, and on this table, there were a couple numbers, but there were 2 numbers in particular that caught my attention, right? There was one number that spelled out the actual volume of digital transactions that were happening, that this company was processing. And then there was another number that was later translated onto a map of Nepal where they showed their points of presence. And this map was littered with red dots all over Nepal. And I sat there for a second thinking, this can't be real. How can this be real? Look at the volume of business that these guys are doing, one, and they have blanketed the entire country. And this is 5 years ago, right? And I thought, my goodness, if only the development world understood, right, that there are models outside of Kenya and East Africa, there are models outside of M-Pesa, there are actually models like that in places like Nepal. What's the art of the possible that could be achieved within a very short period when it comes to digital financial inclusion and access to finance? Fast forward 5 years, my friends at F1 Soft, they're now running a juggernaut of a company, successful, 14 verticals. They have 55,000 merchants across Nepal in their network. They have almost 6 million plus customers by virtue of their banking relationships. And they are they were the number one taxpayer in the ICT segment in Nepal, okay? Perception, reality. And because there's F1 Soft, and because of F1 Soft's competitors, the Prabhus, the IME-Pays of the world, the NEPs, the NCHLs of the world, people like you and I have choice. We are able to choose how we transact online. We're able to choose how we pay our bills. We don't have to wait in line anymore. The world is changing. Again, the perception of what Nepal's digital financial ecosystem looks like and the reality, very, very different. We need to do a better job of owning our own narrative. Okay? And there are dozens of examples that I've experienced like these, right? I'll give you another one. And this is actually a very recent and relevant one because about 3 days ago, a friend of mine, Ashim Pandey, sent me an invitation. And the invitation is to the launch of his product, which he discussed with me very peripherally about a year ago. And we sat in a room in Balodar, and he told me, listen, man, I'm going to design a bike, a motorbike, and it's going to be battery operated. And I looked at him and I said, really, in Nepal? He said, yeah, really, in Nepal, I'm going to do it. He's launching that product on the 19th of December next week, okay? Right here in Nepal. It's not your moped with a battery-powered engine. It is a bona fide motorcycle with a battery-powered source, alternative energy, mobility, you name it, right here in Nepal. So amazing things are happening in this ecosystem, and we, for some reason, just have not been able to capture the narrative and use that narrative to inform the rest of the world about what's happening in Nepal's startup ecosystem. Amazing accidents happen all the time. I have a group of friends who are chartered accountants. They're actually seated somewhere over here, right? So my friends started off trying to solve the problem of how do we make it more accessible for people to start companies online without having to go to the company registrar's office, wait in line forever, do multiple sorts of transactions with different sorts of people just to get their company registered. And moreover, how do they stay compliant with the companies that they've registered, right? While exploring how to solve that problem, they stumbled onto another problem, which they have actually launched a product in and are scaling fast. They're probably going to be Nepal's premier hyper-local logistics company. They're called Upaya Cargo, and it's happening right here in Nepal. A series of serendipitous accidents led to the creation of Upaya, and they're going to do amazing. Another last example in the perception divide. So the latter end of my career, when I was abroad, I was basically charged with going around looking at seed funds, accelerators, incubators on a global basis and trying to find the best ones that the institution I worked for could invest in, right? So as you can imagine, through the many, many interactions and seeing different models over and over again, looking at what works, what doesn't work, over and over and over again, you come up with a perspective, right? You kind of get a sense for what are the critical ingredients that can make sustainable enterprise in this segment of the ecosystem, and what are the things that don't work. And I was thrilled when I came back home and ran into this entity called Movers and Shakers Holdings, okay? I looked at their business model and I thought, goodness, these guys have solved it all. They're doing everything by the book, by a book that isn't even published, right? How is it that they're doing this? Because they were sustainable, they had their costs covered, they were growing enterprises, they were making money, all of this under a single roof in a building that's like less than a 15-minute drive from here, right here in Nepal. The only thing they hadn't done was write the narrative, which is what I worked with them to do, right? Right here in Nepal. So when we think about the ecosystem that we exist in, right, we are no longer at that stage where we're fledgling and we're nascent. Yeah, sure, not everything's perfect, but it's not perfect anywhere in the world, right? We are not that ecosystem that we think we are. We are a completely different, evolved sort of ecosystem. That's what I've seen in Nepal, okay? So kind of tied on to that narrative, I want to talk a little bit about how we need to take control of helping people who have the best of intent and want to help us. So I'm talking about the impact investors of the world. I'm talking about the development finance institutions of the world. I'm talking about the high net worth individuals who may be based abroad. I'm talking about the NRNs who have deep pockets and want to do something in this ecosystem, right? We need to have serious conversations with this crowd, okay? Look, the number of times I'm asked the following question, and this question is starting to drive me crazy, right? The question being, hey, how many assets can you find in Nepal today where we can park $25 million? And the answer to me in a microsecond is a handful, maybe one, maybe two, maybe you'll funnel that down to half an asset, I don't know. The reality is there aren't that many assets that impact investors are looking for in Nepal that can absorb that sort of capital. There just aren't. But have a different conversation with me. Ask me the question differently. Tell me how many single million-dollar deals can I do in Nepal over the next 5 years? Now we're talking, right? Tell me that you want to invest, you want to do intermediated equity. Tell me you want to do a fund. Tell me you want to basically help complete the funding continuum in Nepal. Now we're talking. Do you know why we're talking? Because of the following. If you look at the statistics, over 90% of the registered companies in Nepal are MSMEs. By definition, these companies are the ones that need to absorb the capital to grow to become the next juggernauts of this ecosystem, right? So if you're not catering to them and you're going through a bank that's doing traditional asset-backed lending to this asset class, who are you catering to? You're a development finance institution? Really? Okay, so we need to have these tough conversations with people who want to help, right? It's a combination of, I would say, just continually mapping the ecosystem, and I've gone through 4 mappings of this ecosystem since I came back. It's not really different every time we map it again, but failing to convert that knowledge into actionable capital injections in this ecosystem. We need to have conversations with our friends in the donor community about converting what they already know about this ecosystem into action. Equity, small ticket equity into the riskiest portion of the ecosystem. That's where we need to focus the attention. Because I'll tell you this much, from my own experience, right? There is not an asset class on earth that you will find where you can invest to get the sort of disproportionate return on impact that you can get through tech-enabled SMEs anywhere in the world. We have enough of these to invest in. We just have a mismatched capital allocation, larger tickets in search of deals that don't exist, smaller tickets in search of capital that doesn't fly around. We need to bridge that gap, okay? Last but not least, and this is a little bit of a sort of a passion for me, right? So if you think about the ecosystem, the funding continuum, you'll notice, I think, over here on the one hand, you have a bunch of hungry entrepreneurs in small companies, right? And then there's a small angel investing community that's there to cater to their needs. There's some networking opportunity. Not all of it is super relevant. There's not a whole lot of connectivity across that segment of the ecosystem and other ecosystems that we can learn from. There's not a whole lot of space in Nepal where knowledge workers can go and think and build product. And yet, that portion of the ecosystem is the least funded of the entire ecosystem. You'll find funds that are capitalized at 25, 30, 40, 50, aspirationally 75, even $100 million, right? But they're not the entities that can write tickets that are $5, $10, $15, $20,000, because that's what's actually required. If you fast forward and you think about the fund industry and what they have to look forward to 5 years from now, if they don't pay attention to the early stages of the ecosystem, you're going to have nothing to invest in at all. Building that pipeline today is absolutely crucial, and building that pipeline means more entrepreneurs. It means more next venture corps. It means more communitaires in this ecosystem that have the wherewithal, both the capital, the knowledge, the funding, the access to networks, and all the ingredients that go into building the ecosystem. And we really ought to focus on that segment of the ecosystem, because without that, nothing downstream will work. You can raise all the private equity and venture capital funds in the world you want, none of it's going to amount to anything if you don't have that deal flow, okay? So I'm going to commit to staying within my 20-minute time frame, and I know people are probably starting to get hungry. I'm happy to engage with folks offline, but I want to end by saying the following. Look, our ecosystem is imperfect, okay? I understand that. Talking to my friend Ashim, talking to my friend Sikshit, they understand that more than anybody else, how imperfect the ecosystem is, right? But the ecosystem is young, it's hopeful, it's thriving. There are things happening in this ecosystem that we ought to write case studies about for Harvard Business School. Okay, it's happening right under our noses. So the three things I'd like for everybody in this room to walk away from this interaction, right? How can we focus on changing the narrative, owning the narrative that is the narrative of the Nepali startup ecosystem? One, how do we bridge the divide between how we're perceived abroad and what the reality is of our operating environment in Nepal? Two, how do we engage the well-wishers in our midst, the donors, the DFIs, the philanthropists, the angel investors, the institutional investors, right? How do we get them to recognize the reality of Nepal as an investment destination, the required risk tolerance that's needed to invest here, and how do we get them to engage more meaningfully beyond just mapping the ecosystem in a continuous virtuous cycle of mapping the ecosystem? We need action. And last but not least, I think everybody here understands this. We all need to do our share. And I'm looking at not just the HNWIs in our midst, not just the seasoned entrepreneurs in our midst, but every single one of us. We need to spend time in the earliest stages of this ecosystem, paying it forward, as I like to call it, right? Whatever little time we can afford, whatever we can give, we need to spend time helping others grow. And with that, I leave you on for the next session.